It is now just 6 p.m. and here we are. Thank you for everyone for attending on this Monday evening. This is technically an extracurricular meeting of the Crime and Disorder Committee. The Crime and Disorder Committee comprises members from the scrutiny panel. Good to see you all here. I will go through the housekeeping and then we'll have introductions and then we'll find out what we're going to learn this evening and talk about and hear. So we do not have any practice evacuations planned for this evening. If the alarm does sound, please, in an orderly fashion, head your way downstairs via the main staircase or the side staircase of this building out towards the rear of the building and congregate in the car park. This meeting is being streamed over the internet live and it will be recorded for posterity so we can all look back upon it in the future. Please, would speakers at all times make use of the microphone so that everyone within the room can hear clearly. When you see the red light, you're on, and when it ends, you're off. Toilets are available on this floor as well as the ground floor. Discreet use of mobile phones is okay, but please make sure that they don't make any noises or you'll be fined. And that money will go to the Mayor's charity, so it's all good. We will probably break at 7:30, but depending on where we are with the discussions, I may have a little latitude, but I'll look around the room to make sure we're all comfortable. My name is Darius Laws. I'm a councillor for Rural North Ward, and I'm the chairman tonight. We'll start over on my far left, please, with our introductions.
Tracy Arnold, representing Stanway Ward.
Councillor Sam McCarthy, representing Shrub End Ward.
Faith Smalls, representing Old Heath, the Hive and Rowhedge.
Sam McLean, Newtown and Christchurch.
Dennis Willits, Lexton and Braeswick Ward.
Andrew Tyrrell, Head of Public Protection.
Owen Howell, Democratic Services Officer.
Councillor Natalie Summers, Portfolio Holder for Communities and Ward Member for St Andrews St John's.
Sam Goodman, Community Safety Officer.
Paul Donachie, Licensing, Community Safety and Safeguarding Manager.
Colin Cox, Colchester District Commander.
Beverly Jones from Next Chapter.
Rita Jenner, Lead for Partnership Deliveries, representing Essex County Council Children and Family Services.
Sam Good, Chief Executive of the Colchester Business Improvement District.
Thank you, everyone. Good stuff. Okay, we have no substitutions here this evening of the panel that I'm aware of. We have one member who might be running late, depending on their transport movements from London, but we'll crack on in their absence. As far as I know, there are no urgent items tonight. Declarations of interest, members? I see none. And therefore we look at the minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of September. And I need to ask that you are all satisfied that they reflect that meeting. Is everyone content with that? Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 6, which is Have Your Say. And we are very fortunate and inclusive to do this. We like members of the public coming in and having their say. That is great, but I just would politely point out that I do have the discretion to curtail any enthusiasm if any boundaries that I consider to be objectionable are touched. So with that in mind, I'll call up someone that I'm sure wouldn't cross any lines, and that is Councillor Goetcher.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, colleagues. I'm Mark Goetcher. I'm one of the councillors for Castle Ward, which is central Colchester, where there are quite a lot of issues to do with antisocial behaviour and crime that residents would like me to raise. One of them is the North Station Road area and all of its tributaries, even extending to the Dutch Quarter, where there's a bit of a perception, and I do use that word, perception, that it's a bit out of control in terms of antisocial behaviour. A lot of it, is perceived to be connected with certain buildings, certain blocks of HMOs and so on, which may or may not actually be in reality the case. But there are these worries, and it involves not only drug dealing and the usual, but there's a perception that there's potential noise at night, it feels unsafe to people. And that is also the true of parts of the Dutch Quarter. So I'm just wondering if there's anything more we can do about that. The other issue that people have raised is Castle Park. And I do find it very sad that people, I think 2 people have said to me that they don't feel safe in the park, even in the daytime. Gangs of youths have been mentioned and so forth. And what can we do about just creating the feeling of safety? Because these are perceptions. Another one, and I do feel this is a perception, is that knife crime is on the increase in central Colchester. Now, I'm not saying that's the case. I'm saying that there's a perception out there. So what can we do? What are we doing about that? I know the Gazette is running a campaign on this. What are we doing to minimise that perception and minimise the reality as well about knife crime? So those are my 3 central issues. One further question. I was reading on that Hammersmith and Fulham Council have something called a law enforcement team, where the council actually work with the police and provide people who walk around the centre of Hammersmith and Fulham and assist the police in their activity. This is not extracurricular. It is part of working with the police, and the police obviously monitor it and run it, but the council pay for it. Has that ever been explored here? Obviously, at the moment, given the financial situation, I presume the council wouldn't be able to afford it, but has that ever been explored as an idea? I mean, as far as I'm aware, it's just London. But is that something that's ever been explored elsewhere? Thank you.
Thank you for coming, Councillor Gocher, for having your say as someone who represents the city centre. You are no doubt on the front line of hearing things that not everyone would hear. So it's good to hear that insight. I'm not going to respond comprehensively, but I will give colleagues here the opportunity to respond very briefly to you if they would like. But we do have quite a lot of meat to get through tonight. But I would say to you now that no doubt police colleagues would say that if one does see antisocial behaviour or crime in North Station Road, in the Dutch Quarter or in Castle Park, even if it feels a small matter, we've got to collectively encourage the reporting of crime at all times. I think it's a good thing that this authority, and that's a consensus, has got the PSPO in place, which gives police and partners the stick if they need it to tackle some ASB. And of course, we fund, don't we, CCTV in Colchester, and that is a choice, and that's probably a very sensible choice. But look, you've got people here who I would give them a chance to see if they would like to acknowledge that they are alive to what you have said tonight. And I don't know if we want to. I'm looking at Councillor Somers first. So are we as a partnership, Councillor Somers, are we alive to the typical points that were just raised there by Councillor Gocher?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as you know, Mark, we did hold a day of action last month in the North Station area. So, that was obviously fully supported by the police. There was over 40 duty of cares were conducted, the streets were cleaned, conducted stop and searches, and there was lots of stuff done, as you know. So obviously that's something we'd like to continue doing. Obviously we've got other areas in Colchester we need to consider in that as well. But there's going to be more patrols in the Castle Park over the summer as well, as spring, summer. They're sort of being arranged now, and obviously coordinating with the police where possible. And yes, we can look into obviously getting more regular patrols going up and down North Station Road. I think we can. I mean, obviously it is part of the PSPO area. So we can work on those. But I don't know if you've got anything more you want to add to that, Paul?
Obviously, with regards to the law enforcement teams, obviously neighbourhood wardens can enforce certain powers, which would be a similar thing. I mean, obviously the Hammersmith and Fulham, whether that's they've been given powers of special constable and things like that. I'm not entirely sure. Obviously, our wardens can do certain things. There are partnerships under OPDIAL, which is antisocial behaviour patrolling, and the police and ourselves work in partnership on that. The issue, of course, is perception, and how you challenge perception as opposed to figures, and it's reducing the fear of crime rather than just the activity of crime itself. But obviously, that's why the gentleman to the right of me will probably have more information.
Okay, I'll try and cover all three bits. So the initial about Station Road and Dutch Quarter, I know that my CPT inspector has been linking in. That was raised at the PFCC meeting, and from that we took an action away to work with the council and the partnership to look at how we can improve the area. And obviously we've heard that there was a day of action. So Ops Stronghold was a week-long activity, and one of those days was targeting with multiple partners. So you had immigration, you had the CPT, the town centre team deployed there, you had the council officers going in there. So there was a lot of activity looking at lots of different vulnerabilities, shall I say, as well. And that will be repeated through the coming. We try and do Ops Stronghold during the school holidays when there's an increased footfall and people and more reports, etc. And it's also an engagement opportunity to engage with youngsters rather than just being, you know, the stick and you know, enforcement all the time. Actually, it's about trying to engage with them, get them involved with active Essex actually, and divert them to other things. In relation to Castle Park, you mentioned obviously the fear of crime, the perception, groups of youths, and my challenge back will be, what are groups of youths doing? Actually, they want to be together, they themselves feel concerned, so they go out in groups as well. So we have to understand what is the actual activity rather than just pointing the finger and saying, I don't like groups of youths together. So that needs to be challenged back. But obviously we have powers, we will engage, the wardens themselves have powers, and we will continue those regular patrols supporting our colleagues. Knife crime, there is an increase in knife crime. I think that's a national picture, and not just in Colchester, we're seeing it everywhere. But it starts at grassroots level. It's about education, trying to prevent why are people carrying knives in the first place. They're easily, they're accessible, etc. But we do test purchasing operations, and I know there's a report in the pack about alcohol, vapes, but there's also knives and test purchasing that we do, and then there's enforcement that comes out of that. We target known knife carriers as well, so when we receive intelligence, we will have teams that go out and will target those individuals. We will have specialist units from the operational support group that will come out and put on days of action with nighttime economy. They will deploy with knife archers, etc. So there's a lot of enforcement that goes on, but it's really about getting in there early and educating youngsters so they don't feel the need to carry a knife, because ultimately they're probably likely to be injured by their own knife that they're carrying. So it's about that, and actually parents have a role here as well, being intrusive about what youngsters are up to. So it's a joint, combined partnership. It's a community issue, not just a policing enforcement issue.
Councillor Coacher, are you happy with what you've heard so far?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and I'd just like to thank everyone for the work they're doing. You know, that I like the points about prevention. Prevention is always better than cure, including with this, and the challenging perception point about groups of youths. I totally agree with that. So thank you, and thanks for all the work you've all been doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coacher. That support is no doubt appreciated. Okay. Can I just make it?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, apologies from me. I've committed the cardinal sin of democratic services. I've actually forgotten my bell at this meeting. So when members of the public have their say, I will knock the table once at 2 minutes and then knock the table twice at 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to get a replacement bell, if not the actual bell. I've only ever touched it once, and it's a great moment. So hopefully it will come along.
We will end up with a bong at this meeting.
Okay, we have another member of the public here, I believe, to speak. Can I call up Kemal? And you're coming just at the right time, because there it is. The bell. Can we have 3 minutes and you will hear a bell at 2? Over to you.
Good afternoon, panel. My name is Kemal.
Kemal, sorry. Do you mind just taking a slight step back from the mic?
All right.
Because otherwise it will distort quite dramatically.
Right, okay.
I'm really guilty of this, so I can hear it. Okay, you have the floor.
All right. Good afternoon. My name is Kemal, and I'm here as the Policy Development Officer of Colchester Greens. Tonight I'm here to share concerns which were shared with me by residents from Rosebery and Smithies, as well as Serpentine Walk and Albert Street. On my visit to Rosebery and Smithies, I talked with residents, many of whom raise antisocial behavior and drug crimes as their #1 concern, surpassing the traffic congestion, which has been the traditional main local issue that also remains unresolved. During my meeting with residents from these two streets, those living around the lower end of the street complain about that many drunk people are now gathering in front of residents' houses, causing nuisance and a sense of insecurity. Littering and antisocial behavior are also coming up as linked issues. Residents living in the middle of the street told me that the area where Rosebery Avenue meets with Smithies became a common place for drug dealers to meet and trade. I was told that during odd hours of the day, particularly once it is dark or around midnight, unknown and unfamiliar cars come and park along the Rosebery Smithies junction. And many people start visiting these cars and drivers inside. This type of behavior and scenes were observed by at least 4 residents. Another resident shared his concern that one of the drug hubs is on the East Street. I was told by another resident that Emmelp Walk, which is a shortcut that connects Nicholson Grove to Colchester Town Station, has insufficient street lights, which is making it particularly dangerous. A concerned resident told me that her son was stopped by drunk as well as people under the influence of drugs there. Similarly, 2 weeks ago, I also met with a concerned resident from Coaston Road, and we recorded more than 150 vehicles coming from Coventry Avenue and North Station Road that use Serpentine Walk, Albert Street and Coaston Road as a shortcut to bypass the congestion. This practice is against the traffic rules and restrictions that these streets have. Between 8 a.m. and 9:30, no cars can enter to these roads apart from the residents themselves. Most of the cars we observed were also not respecting the 20-mile-per-hour rule, making these streets not only more polluted and busy, but also dangerous. Albert Street is a particularly narrow street that fits only one car in both directions, and the fact that local rules are not being enforced is causing residents which have kids experience trouble when trying to leave their homes or walking their children to local schools. Although it seems like there has been a fall in some specific types of crimes committed in Colchester, nearly all the crime rates remain high, and 2023 and 2024 rates and numbers are significantly higher than they were 5 years ago. I believe it is cardinal that not only residents, police and council work together to address, report and reduce the number of crimes, but also take constructive steps to make residents feel safe and secure too. During my exchange with the residents, I also noticed that they have ideas and potential solutions which sounded quite practical. Therefore, I believe it will be very useful to contact and actively engage with residents' associations. Thank you.
Thank you, Kemal, for coming along. You've described there some very specific locations which no doubt have legitimate concerns. Broadly speaking, when it comes to antisocial behaviour, intoxication in the street, potential drug dealing, I'm hoping I'm speaking on the right wavelength here, but evidence gathering is a jigsaw, and so it might feel like gosh, that car there, I'm not sure if they are being suspicious or not, but actually taking a note of the description of maybe who's in the car, the registration plate, and providing that to Essex Police might be part of that jigsaw and that evidence capturing situation. So we need to probably encourage that, but I will just check in with Colin. Is that the right approach? And if members of the public do see something suspicious perpetually happening in their vicinity, what's the best mechanic that they, because obviously they're not going to call 101 or 999 necessarily if they just see a suspicious car. How can they communicate their concerns, Colin?
So there's many different ways to contact Essex Police. There's online, you've got the single online home, you can submit intelligence via that way. If people don't want to leave their details, Crime Stoppers, it's anonymous and it's a good route in to just provide information. Again, people can do that to us. We get that come through to us, it gets scored and it gets sent out to the community policing teams to act on that intelligence. If you've got repeat areas, like you're saying, it's been witnessed lots and lots of times, if those reports are coming through, then I'd expect the town centre team or the CPT to pick up patrols in those areas and target those vehicles. Obviously, one of the areas is Cowdery Avenue for Op Dial, so again, increased ASB patrols are in those areas, so I would expect them to, incorporate those areas. As long as we're getting that information, it's all right them reporting it to yourself, but they need to tell us so that we can build that picture. And again, as mentioned, ASB, if it all comes in, we've got a CPT email address inbox that goes out with that I can share with you at the end of this, and then you can give that to your residents as well to say, look, here's a point of contact, and then my officers can pick that straight up in email form and send it out for patrols. All right.
Okay, well, are you happy with what you've heard?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for coming. I will just invite Sam Good, because he did catch my eye earlier on, and I know that Sam, you represent the Business Improvement District, which is some circa 400 members within the city centre. I saw your eye earlier, so I'm sorry for not to giving you the platform. You now have it.
Yeah, no worries. Apologies, it isn't on this topic, as them streets don't come under our area. But I just wanted to give a business perspective on the previous point from Councillor Gocher. The City Centre was recently awarded the Purple Flag status and commended for its partnership working, and I think we should compliment all parties around the table on that. Businesses also complimented on their safety and their levels of safety. All knife crime reports, to my knowledge, over the last couple of years, none were related to any business operations or anything actually happening in the city centre. And I think it's really, really important that we make sure that message is continually shared. But going back to the perception piece, we're facing a huge battle with workers at the moment. City centre workers, nighttime economy workers, where we're facing a real challenge on attracting these people into the city centre, and it's becoming a real economic issue to the point we're now working with the university on a night bus, which hopefully will get funding soon from the PFCC. Thought I'd get that one in just to try and push, but that's all. So sorry, I should have got that in a bit earlier.
Thanks, Sam. Okay, Kemal, thank you very much, and you're welcome to join us for the rest of the evening, or if you need to be going elsewhere, it's entirely up to you. But we'll now move on. Thank you. Okay, right. Well, what we're here for tonight, we have a statutory duty to scrutinise the work of the Safer Colchester Partnership. This is, as I say, an extracurricular meeting in which we're able to look in detail at some of the data. But before we get into that, we're going to need to have a presentation, and I think that's possibly you, Paul. There we go. There we go. The difference between handwriting and printed writing. I didn't see the printed. Forgive me. Okay, we will we'll take speakers on this item before we have the presentation. So I would call Vinny to the stage. Vinny from the Business Improvement District. I know that you're out there day in and day out. You see things everywhere and you hear things, and so your insight is always very useful. Thank you for making the time this evening on Monday. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, panel. But I must start by thanking Essex Police for their response to Saturday's Let's Women Speak event at the War Memorial. Officers were very approachable and very focused. What may have been a difficult set of circumstances to appease all was handled very professionally. In my appearance at the last meeting, I was critical of the policing performance. Others who attended also spoke about attendance and visibility of police in the city. I wish to update the panel on what has happened since that meeting. An immediate response from Chief Inspector Colin Cox, in sporting terms, the arrival of a new player on the roster who makes an impact on performance. I would say that Inspector General Merrington French has been that player, and Chief Inspector Cox can be seen as having great player management. The engagement with Colback and myself has increased, and there is a real desire to work. The willingness to listen to the bid has been a great start, and we have always wanted to help where we can. During October, November and December, there was a considerable increase in policing presence. Businesses were seeing a real impact in the city. In December, Essex Police Serious Violence Unit, led by Detective Inspector Karen Miller, sought the assistance from the bid. Drafting started on a Colchester Community Impact Survey, and in November and December, the survey went live. Using the statistics, but also useful data for the Colchester Safety Partnership, ready for understanding how best to deploy the following February. In the new year, they deployed specifically to venues to speak with management staff about the impact of training, upskilling, and support venues received on the impacts of vulnerability and crime. And in February, their deployment over the weekends proved very valuable to all, including the businesses. January and February, there was a little decline in police presence, but a scheduled meeting with Chief Inspector Cox and Inspector Merrington French meant that we spoke openly, and I feel positive that this will be responded to. These conversations that are held are two-way, and a key element for me to work towards is helping their team build the picture. Report, report, report. We continue to be open to conversations, bouncing ideas off on how to assist each other. And I just hope that because of the potential lack of reporting last summer, will not affect the Colchester resourcing this summer if considerations are made to deployment across the county. It's encouraging to see the statistics that are coming out. There has been a significant increase in the positive outcomes to crime, up to 21% in January 2024. And there are key areas that have seen a decline in reported offences locally and county-wide. Focusing on Colchester, a decline in reporting on sexual offences, domestic abuse and hate crime. These are very long and complex crimes with long lines of inquiries, and some investigations may not be pursued for many reasons. But I can say to the panel today that work to understand that decline is already in action. The likes of CAR, Next Chapter, the Change Project already contribute to the Community Safety Delivery Board. We will continue forwards, facing the challenges that may be present and in the future.
Vinny, thank you for that. That was really positive and upbeat, and great to hear. Sam, do you want to respond broadly to what's been said?
Me? Yep. Yes, we've met with Colchester Bid as well as a partnership, just to make sure that we are working together, achieving what both parties need. So I think that relationship, that partnership working is there and is becoming fruitful.
Would anyone else like to add anything?
Chair, if I may, on behalf of the CSP and obviously the community safety side of the council, the partnership relationship with Essex Police is exactly as Vinny has described. Inspector Merrington French, Mr. Cox, it's an absolute pleasure for us to work together as a team.
Okay, very encouraging. Vinny, anything else you'd like to say tonight?
That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great. Okay, next up we have a statement to be read out from Michelle Reynolds, who couldn't be here this evening, from Colback. And I'll just buy a few seconds for the clerk to get that up, and we'll have that statement, and then we'll proceed with Paul leading on the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Apologies for my delivery, but statement begins. I would like to update the panel as to the actions around shoplifting and antisocial behaviour that Colback brought to the panel's attention last year. Following the panel's meeting, Colback met with Commander Cox and his team and have an action plan in place initially for 6 months. Colback would dearly like to see this extended, and we hope that Commander Cox will agree to this going forward. Colback now has regular meetings with the Commander and the City's Inspector, where we feel we can be frank, but also we too must be realistic. We have seen an increased police presence in the city centre, some days more than others. Is it perfect? No, but it is better than what we had previously. And as per our discussions in these meetings, hopefully more improvements can be made going forward, resulting in a consistent, constant police presence over 7 days. The increase in shoplifting offences continues. As is the national picture, this is due to factors such as cost of living and drug and alcohol addictions, etc. Colback is confident that there remains a considerable number of unreported incidents and encourages its members to report, but we are facing a battle as a lot of businesses have lost confidence. Confidence that the police will actually turn up or that anything will happen, even if the individuals are apprehended. We will continue to encourage reporting, which may have a knock-on effect to police statistics, but consequently, Colchester may be able to have more officers, which would be very welcome. Antisocial behaviour in the town centre continues to aggravate businesses, and whilst we fully appreciate the police view that a gathering of youths who are loud and not technically breaking any laws, they are seen as a threat to shop staff and shoppers alike, particularly the elderly and infirm. These problems are exacerbated at the weekends, and particularly during school holidays. Once these youths run amok through shops and businesses, which they have and do, then there must be consequences, and we look to the police to take whatever enforcement action is necessary. At one of our early meetings, Colback brought to the attention of the police that between the hours of 4 p.m. and 7 p.m, there were significant problems in the city centre. It has taken a while, but we are pleased to say that there's been action on this, and with some movements to staff timing and shifts, these times are now covered. We must express our thanks to Commander Cox and his team for this. Colback looks forward to strengthening its partnership with the police and is happy to continue to report to this panel if it so wishes. That's Michelle Reynolds' statement ends.
Again, another really useful contribution because it's someone that's out there on the front line, seeing what happens every day of the week, no doubt, as I know Michelle works very hard. Commander Cox, do you want to say anything broadly about what you've just heard?
No, the two reports, a fair judgment. We were lacking in some areas last year. The arrival of Jenna, and she won't mind me saying this, has changed the team dynamic considerably, both with partners, engagement, etc. Also holding her own team to account on their performance and what is expected. We meet regularly every 6 weeks to discuss what's happening and current so we can react to it. Moving steps forward, we're looking at self-reporting packs for the retailers themselves, just to speed up the reporting of crime and making it easier so that we can get those records recorded properly, showing the true picture of what shoplifting looks like, but also so that we can deal with those offenders quicker. I say, as Vinny's mentioned, that the solve rates for us in Colchester are higher than any other district, and we've just got to build on that going forward. And if we target the right individuals through a number of means, whether that's diversion, through the support they need to stop offending, but also with enforcement activity, taking them to court, getting criminal behaviour orders on them and preventing them from going into certain premises, hopefully we can reduce that, and it comes back to that prevention piece. But we're in a good place. We just need to continue it and fine tune now moving forward. Thank you.
Okay. Just before we do move to the presentation, just in the interest of balance, and I'm going to be a bit cheeky, but we've heard a lot already this evening with an urban focus. So we've heard about increased patrols, visibility, really good first-hand accounts. So can I just seek reassurance that us folks living in the villages have still got great policing and we've got nothing to worry about, because it's not like they're all here, they're everywhere, aren't they? Can you give me that reassurance?
Absolutely. So in relation to the wider borough areas, shall we say, my community policing team consists of 4 sergeants. 2 of those are based in town centre team. That was part of the money that came in from the government to increase town centre team. The other 2 sergeants are rural and separate or split the remaining areas between themselves. So you've got Sergeant Rob Tem, who's been in the district for a very long time, and you've got Sergeant Ben Knighton, and between them they take care of the rural communities. They have allocated areas, and each area has a designated officer and PCSO, etc. For the more rural locations, you've then got specialist areas from local police and support unit with the watch coordinators, etc., coming in as well to play, because we have a number of watch schemes that would be relevant for them, whether that's the horse rider support scheme, whether that's the farm watch, etc. It's still that linking. A majority of the concerns in rural communities is lack of communication and isolation, and that's where we have to keep those two-way conduits going for communication.
Great stuff. Thank you for that reassurance, and a shout out really to all those involved in the watches, Neighbourhood Watch, the data that you get given on that, where you get to see what types of crimes are happening and where. That's really, really insightful, and it helps to share some of what we might think is obvious, like don't leave a Gucci handbag in your car on a summer's evening with your doors unlocked. It's quite obvious, isn't it? But by actually being able to see some of the specific crimes that happen in those watch reports and where they're happening, certainly helps inform me when I have discussions with my communities. Okay, let's move on for what we're here for. Thank you very much, everyone that's spoken, everyone that's contributed to that general discourse. And Paul, I think you have a presentation for us.
I do, Chair, thank you. Owen, do you put it up on the screen, do you? Thank you.
And Paul, you don't have a bell, so
don't worry, sir. I don't need one.
If we feel it's needed, we've got it within earshot. But I'm sure that's not going to be hit anymore tonight.
I'm fairly certain a foot's closer.
Go for it.
Thank you very much. Owen, you could go straight to slide 3, please, because most people unfortunately know me already. Chair, very quickly, this presentation has been done to support the very detailed report that everyone was sent in advance. And before I start, can I thank Sam for actually producing such a great report, all the details in it. After the meeting in October, we were asked for 3 distinct sort of answers. Firstly, an additional meeting, which is what we're having today. Provide benchmarking data across wider geographical areas rather than just our Essex-based cities and towns, and to hopefully provide an explanation of the divergence of the domestic abuse statistics, what the police have and what our expert partners have. Hopefully that report and the appendices have answered those questions, or at least provided a very good start to answering those questions. So the strategic assessment of crime, next slide please, Owen. So just to give a background, we as a partnership has a statutory duty to carry out a strategic assessment of crime and produce a report. This involves analysis across frequency, location, types of crime from October 1st to 30th September, and to try to identify those patterns and trends. And it breaks down into specific crimes with data such as domestic violence, antisocial behaviour, hate crime, missing people. Next slide, please. There is then a risk matrix which we use to score those crimes. And we don't like the word score, but obviously that's a generic way of explaining how we work out what we as a partnership should target for the forthcoming year. And that includes the volume, how we've done over the course of the previous 12 months, what the risk, harm and impact on people and properties are. And that's not just the obvious, there's obviously psychological harm and the risk to vulnerable groups, the priorities for the PFCC, the police, ourselves, and even whether or not our approach is of benefit. And when those are all scored, there's an overall ranking given to those. Next slide, please, Owen. Now, you can't see it, but it's in the pack. This is the risk matrix. It shows the number of offences and how crimes end up scored against those factors. So last year's priorities, sorry, Owen, next slide. Yes, please, sir. We had 5: safeguarding adults and children at risk of violence and exploitation, tackling neighbourhood crime, antisocial behaviour, supporting the victims of domestic abuse, sexual offences, reduce violence against women and girls, developing an early intervention and prevention to tackle the drivers of crime and reduce reoffending, and work with communities to build resilience and promote safety. we as a partnership get together to see whether those key priorities are still key priorities, whether they've shifted in any way, whether they can be mixed to be more effective so our strategies respond. Next slide, please. Having gone through the risk matrix, worked in partnership and discussed with some of the partners who are here today, actually, we are proposing 4 priorities with the emphasis on partners rather than purely focused on the police. We have a lot of excellent partners that we can better use to deliver better results than relying on enforcement. So number 1, we would like to put forward supporting the victims and survivors of domestic abuse and sexual offences, to enable the community to reduce violence against women and girls, and promote safe and healthy relationships. That's across all genders. And we specifically removed violence on women and girls from number 1, because obviously men can be victims of crime, and those who don't identify under any of the 2 previous genders, standalone genders, they also could be protected. Protecting the vulnerable and those at risk.
Sorry, just to interrupt you there. So just for a point of clarity, what you said under 1, we're just being clear on this. This is just a list. This
Yes.
is not a hierarchy.
No.
Yeah, because you had the emphasis on the word 1. I just wanted to be
No,
clear.
so just the order they're written on my piece of
Yeah,
paper,
cool.
1 to 4.
Cool. Very
There-
sensible
there is-
suggestion that has been made as well. Okay.
Yeah, just to clarify, there is no emphasis on 1 to 4. So we would like to protect the vulnerable and those at risk of serious violence or exploitation. And most importantly is obviously empowering people throughout our communities to build safe, inclusive and resilient communities. Next slide, please. Benchmarking was something we discussed in a previous briefing. Now, when we spoke to Essex Police, they obviously have the information with regards to their own cities and towns. They don't hold that data for other areas, unsurprisingly. We've looked at other areas by population, and the data unfortunately hasn't been updated since 2022, so it's not necessarily relevant, because obviously our figures have dropped, but so have others. And also, if you look at the towns involved, the demographics, the way it's all set up, it's very hard, I would imagine, to match Blackpool to Oxford. When you look at types of crime and the people who are in those towns at different times, holiday makers, etc., etc. So we found that data, although we've got an average rate of crime of 113 and ours is 112, it's very hard to use that as reliable benchmarking data with any accuracy. So unfortunately, we were unable to really give you the benchmarking you would have liked, just to give that explanation. Next slide, please, Aaron. So also back in the last meeting, the explanation of the differing domestic abuse statistics, with the police showing a fall in the number of domestic abuse cases reported to them, and Next Chapter and partners offering an increase in the number of people coming to them for support and assistance. The report does give a better explanation, obviously, of what those factors may be to show the difference. And of course, without putting anyone on the spot, we do have the police's view here, and of course, a domestic abuse expert in Bev. So it may be better for those kind of points to be put to them, Chair, rather than me giving you some sort of written version. As I said, this was very much an overview because you've been given a lot of detail in the report, but obviously we're happy to take any questions if anybody has them. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you very much. Okay, right. So, members, we begin, and we're looking probably at the strategic assessment here. Who would like to kick off? Faye, Councillor Smalls.
I've got questions on 3 topics: the domestic abuse, shoplifting, and there was some statistics on missing children. So shall I do them as a separate thing? If I do, which should I do first? Sorry. the domestic abuse, I appreciate the explanation of why there's the differences in, so the reports to Next Chapter are going up, aren't they? And to the police, they're going down. But I'm really worried about it because obviously Next Chapter are looking after the victims, which is really important. But if the perpetrators are not, if these aren't being reported as crimes, then the perpetrators are still going to be out there, I assume, and can carry on committing the crime. So I'm really worried about what can be done to help sort of, you know, to support people to be able to report this to the police. And I realise it's highly complex, and if the answer was simple, it would be happening, wouldn't it? So I am concerned about that. Also, there was a statistic, it says with domestic abuse, there's a solved rate of 12.5%. So I don't know what that means when it says solved. And also, there's I can't remember where it was, but there's a section about support given to families to remaining safely in their own homes. I just want to check what that means, because I was worried it might mean that they stay in their homes with the perpetrator. So I'd just like that cleared up. So should we stick with that, and then I'll go on to the other things?
Thank you. They're, is that close enough? They're really interesting questions. I mean, I guess the first one, in terms of perpetrators remaining in the community and continuing to perpetrate domestic abuse, I'm sure that Colin to my left will have a view on what they're doing in terms of tackling that. I'd just like to reassure you that when you look at supporting victims of domestic abuse, we work principally to risk assess them in the very first instance so that we can understand the risk that they are experiencing. For all high-risk victims, no matter whether there is consent from them to bring other agencies in or not, every single high-risk victim that comes to us will be referred through to MARAC, which is a multi-agency risk assessment conference, so that all agencies who have anything to do with that family or to tackling domestic abuse or safety will have a discussion around that particular incident. The majority of our high-risk referrals do come directly from the police, so the police are involved. Any self-referrals that we have that are risked as high will go into that process. So clearly that means that the police are involved, and actually the discrepancy in numbers that you see are most likely to be between our medium risk clients that will come directly to us from other agencies, or our standard risk, where actually they are not at imminent risk of harm. Their perpetrator may well be from 5 or 10 years previously, but the domestic abuse they have experienced continues to impact them on a daily basis, and they need support. So I think the sort of perpetrators that you are talking about, that we should be concerned about being on the street, absolutely are highlighted to the police. And I know that we work in partnership around, they're really important change in the way of policing in terms of targeting those really high-risk perpetrators. And I know that that's been incredibly successful, and we've had some really prolific offenders and dangerous offenders that have been taken off the streets and are actually behind bars. So I think this different way of approaching is really working for those high-risk perpetrators. So I can reassure you that there may well be people out there that we wish could be tackled, but in terms of the highest risk, I would say that we work well in partnership to make sure that they're still picked up. Did you want me to just go on to the support? The solved rate is not my stat, so I can hand back in a moment. But in terms of support to remain safely in their own home, when we talk about support to remain safely in their own home, that isn't with the perpetrator. So we're talking about the ability for somebody to remain in their home after the relationship has ended and the perpetrator has left, but there are additional safety methods that we have. So things like ring doorbells that can be used for remote answering for evidence collecting purposes, CCTV, safety plans, their addresses can be featured on watch lists. We can have things like non-molestation orders, other orders that are in place in order to protect them and enable them to stay safely in their own home so that they don't have to lose all of their networking and all of their life around them, as well as experiencing domestic abuse. So, not with the perpetrator though.
Commander, did you want to comment on this point?
Yes, I will. So in relation to targeting offenders, domestic perpetrator offenders, so Essex Police has a high harm cohort. We're very much focused on high harm offenders, whether that's domestic or just high harm offences in general, which are sexual offences, including rape, serious violence, burglary, etc., robbery. Those types of offences, obviously high risk domestic perpetrators generally fall in the high risk assaults, etc. So we have a high harm cohort that is a scored offenders, and they are then owned by relevant teams. So that might be an offender that falls under DATE, which is the Domestic Abuse Investigation Team. DATE also have a proactive arm of them, which is the Domestic Abuse Problem Solving Team. And all they do is focus on targeting those individuals, targeting those offenders, whether it's something low level as dealing with them for no insurance on a vehicle, so it's an Achilles heel approach, right through to going to court and representing why they shouldn't get bail or why they shouldn't be released, etc. So, and they are, I think they're an award-winning team. They've been recognised about the proactive work, and we're lucky that we have a really proactive team here in Colchester that go out and they work closely with the CPTs as well, because it's that knowledge. Obviously, the CPTs are going into houses regularly, they're working with partners, they're picking up on this, and obviously the DAPS team, as they're known, and the CPTs work very closely together. We have dedicated nightshade. So what nightshade is, when there are arrests for people, they are given a top priority to go out and arrest them. And we will not utilise just only the officers in Colchester. We will get additional assets from the operational support group that will go out, and they will just simply arrest individuals. And that could be from anywhere in the country committing crime here, that they will go cross border and arrest individuals to bring back. We're looking more at DVPOs, so domestic violence protection orders. Again, that gives victims of crime and domestics breathing space to actually have some clarity, because obviously it's an emotional situation at that time. The police have arrived and they're saying, what do you want us to do, etc. Do you want this person to go to court? But if we can get a DVPO that then leads to a DVPN, the notice, it gives that breathing space for a victim and support agencies to get in to actually almost unpack that situation about how that individual can move on without the perpetrator in their lives, and it gives them that support. Again, with stalking prevention orders, those are other sort of strings to a bow that we can tackle these individuals with. And we have a POET team, which is the proactive, I've got to remember it now in the right order, proactive order enforcement team. But the POET team are the ones that go out and they actually enforce these orders. So when there's a breach, they will go out and deal with them. So we're not just getting the orders and forgetting about them. We're actually using them as a targeted tool, so to speak. Hopefully that reassures you that domestic abuse, regardless of what level, from high and mediums right through to standard that sit with the local policing teams, are a real big focus for the force. And I know I hold my inspectors to account on their performance in relation to standard risk domestics. We've introduced DARA, which is a new domestic abuse sort of assessment, which has seen more standard risk domestics historically have now moved into the medium risk category. So again, being picked up by specialist investigators that are trained just to deal with domestic abuse. In relation to the solved rates, yes. So the question.
Sorry, there's a statistic that on page 57, it says there's a solved rate of 12.5%. I just didn't know what that meant in terms of relation to domestic abuse.
Yeah, so all crime, in all crime there is a solved rate. So the recorded number of offences against the solved outcomes, not resolved. So there's only a certain number of solved outcomes that we can claim a positive enforcement type action against an individual. Someone's held to account for that offence. So the the number you've got there is probably for all domestic as opposed to a particular risk there.
I assume so, yes.
Yeah, so I've got a different set of numbers here that break them down to a high, medium and standard. All right, but that's what a solved rate is. It's the number of crimes that have a positive outcome, holding an individual to account against the recorded offences for that period of time.
Thank you. Shall I go on to the shoplifting? So it's really pleasing to hear that there's seems to have been a lot of improvement since the last meeting. But my question is, my understanding is shoplifting offences where under £200 worth of goods are stolen can be dealt with a fixed penalty notice, whereas above that value it can be treated in a different way with possibly potential jail time. What does this mean in reality in Colchester to how this crime is dealt with and how statistics are recorded? And the whole North Station Road area, I did have I don't know if you'd call it perception, but it was a real, yeah. I was in the one stop on North Station Road, and then I was looking for a basket, and I thought, well, this is weird, I can't find a shopping basket. So I went to the young assistants, and they said, oh no, we have to keep the shopping baskets behind the counter to stop the shoplifters taking too much out. And you know, so they were genuinely, this is something they've been instructed to do, to not have shopping baskets out, which obviously it doesn't make you feel very pleasant and encouraged to be in a shop where, you know, the young assistants, and I've got no reason to disbelieve them, that they've been instructed to keep the baskets behind the counter because of the risk of shoplifting. So it's sort of, and I don't know if that again is related to this 200 rule, which is a national thing, isn't it? And it's, yeah, there's been I think the co-op did, you know, spoke about it, but I'll stop now.
So Essex Police don't give out any fixed penalty notices for shoplifting. We don't use that as a disposal mechanism for any offences. So we will have things ranging from a community resolution, which will be a positive outcome, where there can be some restorative and type punishment, shall we say, to an individual, and that might be ranging from all types of offences, from the young person who smashed a window kicking a football. Actually, you'll tidy up the bins, you know, make reparation to pay back the damage, etc. That is the lowest level that we will deal with, and then it ranges through to you know, a caution, a conditional caution again, where we can put restriction, you know, conditions in place on a conditional caution. It might be attend an alcohol treatment scheme, it might be drugs, etc. It might be part of that is to pay back what you stole, etc. It might be attending a victim awareness course. So that's a conditional caution, and then we go on to actually those are out of court disposals, and then, you know, actually appearing at a court. So those are the different outcomes that we have. Like I say, we don't give out fixed penalty notices for anything in relation to shoplifting. There used to be a £200 limit in relation to certain organisations for low value type theft and not processed with, but since obviously the retail action plans come in, we've reassessed that altogether, and we're now dealing with multiple offences against individuals that are so low level, but the volume of what they're committing is adding up way beyond that, rather than, and that's where we lead on to criminal behaviour orders, where we try and ban them from locations. In relation to the crime prevention advice that was probably provided by the retail, the business crime team, anything that puts the offender on the back foot, makes them think twice about committing crime, moving alcohol away from the front of the store, all those things. So if it is a case of you've got to ask for a basket to go shopping, actually that engagement can put an offender off from wanting to shop. I know when I go into a well-known electrical store in Cambridge, and the first thing people through the door when I'm walking through there, and they say, hello, how can I help you, what you're looking for? Suddenly it puts you on guard. If you're a shoplifter with the intention to commit crime and someone's already engaged with you, ask you what you're looking for, and if they can help in a nice way, suddenly that shoplifting's invisible symbol sign, it starts flashing and they don't want to be there and they want to go somewhere else. So that's that engagement.
Thank you. And then the last one was missing children, which was very upsetting, really. So there was 822 reports, and of that 99 were repeat reports. And I'm just wondering how many of those cases do you know are the children found? Is it the majority, or is it rare for them not to be found? Because that just seemed really troubling. So it was 822, if I've got that right. It's on page 62.
Okay, I would say that all cases of missing children are found. For Colchester, I'm not aware of any child. A missing person is anyone whose whereabouts cannot be easily ascertained. That's the definition. So we were obviously, any missing child reported to us is automatically graded as a medium risk MISPA unless there are considerable aggravating factors that might push them up to high risk, if they're, you know, at risk of something, exploitation, or, you know, they are making threats themselves to harm themselves. But yeah, we have a partnership approach again to that. They're raised through the MACE meetings, the missing and child exploitation groups, where individuals are raised. And I think I've got an expert probably who cover it better.
Yes, they have the missing and exploitation meetings. So they have the individual names, that's MACE 1, and then they have MACE 2, which is looking at the partnership approach to looking at these missing and children, young people at risk of exploitation. Also, as part of that, they've got a new team around the family support officers, which are working very closely with these children who may be at risk in the community. And so there's a lot of new ongoing work since the last meeting, working specifically with that. We had a recent meeting, and one of the statistics that I was quite surprised by was that out of 82 that one of these risk in the community TAFSOs were working with, 68% of them had either an education care plan or had SEND needs. So it just highlights the need to be working as a partnership and system working, because, you know, all of these are vulnerability, these young people are vulnerable. So there is the two approaches, of the individual approach and also the partnership approach. And they all feed into all of these work streams that we're talking about today.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for all the work.
Thanks for the questions, Councillor Smalls. I've got a number of eyes in the room, so we'll have Councillor McLean first of all.
Sure, I don't mind if this councillor wants to introduce himself, because he's just arrived.
Are you auditioning for a chairman role? There might be a vacancy next year. So yes, you're quite right. And I thought you subtly came in there, but as you have the floor, who are you and why are you here?
I was going to say, I assumed that you'd already explained, but my name is Thomas Rowe and I am councillor for rural Northwood.
I had explained very early on that you were a little bit on the drag due to your movements from London, so thank you for joining us and getting here. Over to you, Councillor McLean, a future chairman of this panel, you never know.
I think I'd have to be a Tory for that. Not really. Yeah, I'm looking at page 7 of the Safer Colchester Partnership report. And there's a list of reductions in offences and crimes. I'm wondering how you test to see what the causes of those reductions are, and how you test to see whether those reductions are caused by anything rather than just being sort of a natural variation in data. Because it could be, you know, 1 year there were more rainy days, so less people burgled. You wouldn't expect every year to have the same data. And a lot of the numbers between 2019 and 2024 are sort of hover kind of around within a sort of similar range. So I just want to know sort of what you do with that. Let me know if I need to explain more.
I think it's very challenging to try and prove how effective crime prevention can be. How can we quantify what we've prevented by simply crime prevention? You know, we asked Neighbourhood Watch to put out key messages. There's individuals that as the police force, we will enforce, we will target, we will lock them up for a period of time, their offending will stop. But if the community all took on the message that we put out as a partnership to try and keep them safe, to not make them vulnerable for items being stolen easy, you know, things like that. If they took all that on board, how do we quantify what is actually in relation to, you know, how can we quantify that we've been successful in that? I know that certain things, like I say, will reduce because we've targeted key individuals. We've locked up the burglars, they're not committing burglaries anymore, so therefore we do see a drop. When they come out from prison, we see offending go back up, we're targeting individuals, and it's that, so on and so forth.
On this point,
and to that point that you said, if you see the numbers go down and then rise with individuals, does that not show that the prevention isn't working? And the prevention, the prevention of putting them in prison works, but the prevention of sort of, you know, asking them, you know, when they go into a shop and we say hello, etc. The example you gave earlier, does that not prove that it doesn't work? Not being awkward.
Not at all. It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? It's a generational thing. So if I educate a whole year of people saying, do not lock things in, you know, show things on display. We talked about the expensive handbag on display in the car park, and I educate the whole community about that. Give it a couple of years, I've got to repeat the same messages because generational is moving on. The same with speeding. I can target speeding drivers and enforce those drivers. But give me another year, I'm going to have another load of 17, 18 new drivers, and I have to educate those again. So I could say, yes, crime prevention doesn't work. I'd love you to have that argument with Neighbourhood Watch. But it's about, there's new people. Culture's growing all the time, so we have to educate new residents to the city as well.
No, that's fair enough. I appreciate your answer, and I have had this conversation with certain people, including the crime commissioner. So I am more along the lines of enforcement rather than prevention. But it is interesting to see, you know, obviously your frontline experience of how this works, and obviously take that on board very much so. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rowe, for the intervention. Councillor McCain, you're still on.
Thanks, Chair. So, for example, sexual offences in this table I'm seeing here with green and pink to represent decrease and increase, I imagine. And then above it, it says sexual offences reduced by 17.3%. However,
Chairman, can we just check the page that we're on?
it's page 7 of Safer Colchester Partnership report. It's the big one at the top.
It's 23 overall.
Oh, is it 23?
Yeah, it's page 23 if you
Of the
don't,
agenda, yeah.
the agenda sort of thing.
So, yeah, it says it's reduced from 859 to 710. However, looking further back than 2023, I see that I still see the number 710 being much higher than it was in 2019, 2020, 2021. So it's not really, it doesn't look like a reduction to me, because that could just be a variation in the data, natural variation. So I'm wondering, I want to know what statistical testing is done to conclude that there is some kind of reduction. Thanks.
Okay, in relation to sexual offences, so part of the old domestic abuse risk assessment that we used to do, there was a question in there that focused on consent, sexual consent for DV victims. And we, the police, used to identify sexual offences in relation to that, the response to that question. Was true consent being given by a victim of a domestic abuse? We might go there for a domestic, for other matters. And part of that risk assessment was a question in relation to, do you feel comfortable, or does your partner do anything that makes you feel uncomfortable? And it might be that we get a positive response from that question. Now, when that question came in was 2019. Since then, we saw a lot of drive to ensure that we were correctly recording sexual offences following that question 19. So you would see a rise in those cases, which you see played out here. Simple things that will change. Stalking and harassment also change. We saw a real increase in the recording, because this is Home Office recording, not Essex Police recording. We have to comply with their requirements, so we would see almost duplicate reports being made rather than continuation of stalking and harassment. So you would see, so at different points in time, different things might have happened in relation to legislation, questions, risk assessments.
Thank you for that answer. Do you foresee any other changes to the questioning that might come in the future to get more people to report these crimes or domestic violence?
Do I foresee changes that the government brings in relation to the questions?
No, so what so if I've understood, you reviewed the questioning of victims of DV.
There was a question set brought in for a DASH assessment. One of the questions on there highlighted that police forces were not picking up on sexual offences that were being disclosed. This was educating officers what true consent was. Yeah, and educating members of the public and victims about what true consent is. I feel that I was compelled to sleep with that person to stop them moaning or shouting at me. Well, that's not true consent. All right, and that's the understanding of that, when individuals and victims realised that actually, I don't need to sleep with someone just to stop them annoying me. So that was educating for both sides, the police and also the wider community and people that service users for us. Do I think other changes will come in? I can't foresee that. We'll obviously comply with what comes through.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to brush on hate crime, if possible. With it being a general election year and the rhetoric from some MPs and an alleged news channel, do you foresee that hate crime, obviously there's been quite a significant decrease, would you foresee that there will be an increase over the next year or so? Obviously there's major conflicts in the world which are causing some hate crimes to increase, I'd imagine. Are you guys prepared for it? The other thing is, I've been a hate crime ambassador for a couple of years because there was a big rise in Shrub End, my ward. We haven't had a workshop here for hate crime ambassadors for 2 or 3 years. I was wondering if maybe Councillor Summers could potentially pick that up and maybe we could have a workshop for hate crime ambassadors. And the other thing was the press here tonight. Sorry to point and drag you in, but do you think the press perhaps have a role to play when it comes to prevention of crimes and also awareness as well on how to, signposting, that kind of thing? I do. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
It's not just aimed at you. I was just in general. Whoever wants to pick it up is welcome to. So I think everyone has a role to play in this. But yeah.
Councillor Summers, you had a very direct request there.
Yes.
Around hate crime. Is that something you can consider?
Yes, can certainly look into seeing if we can get that running up again.
Thank you very much. Commander Cox.
Yeah, and I'll also make sure Lou Middleton's tied into that, because obviously he's the hate crime officer for the North and obviously based in Coast. In relation to hate crime itself, I'm nervous about the figures and I'm nervous that we're seeing a reduction. It's a bit like domestic abuse. It's one of those crimes that you almost want to celebrate when you see it going up because people have the confidence to report it. So this is one area where I'd like to see that still go up. We had a big drive before and we saw the numbers go up, but we also made sure that we had things in place. We responded to those. The fact that it's gone down, I am nervous about that because we've got a huge diverse community in Colchester. And yeah, it's one of those areas we've got to focus on. So I'd like to see it going up can I predict that there's going to be more? I think there is. I think there's underreporting now for it in relation to that. So, yeah, we're prepared for it. All the crimes will go to CPT. They own those investigations because sometimes there is problem solving that's needed. If it's a one-off incident, etc., not necessarily so much problem solving, but we've got to adjust that perpetrator's behaviour. My concern is people don't support us, as in wanting to do something, even if it's as low level as go and speak to the individual who said the comment. Because if we don't challenge that behaviour early, an hour down the road, 2 hours down the road, they're saying the same comment to someone else. And when, you know, it's perpetuating itself, rather than actually saying, holding that individual to account, say, do you know what you said had an impact on this? And it's sometimes that realisation. So I would want more victims to support police action when we have those reports, but absolutely.
Thank you very much. Is
it a different subject matter?
No, on this, and then I'm done. I think, as you rightly say, I think it is a case of people either not being aware of how to report it, being scared to report it, or just passing it off, because some people are very sadly used to it. Where else, so again, going back to sort of Lou's role, where else do they do like awareness for hate crime, workshops, that kind of thing? Would it be like community centres or something like that? Because I must admit, in Shrub End where I am, it's a very diverse ward. I've never seen a workshop carried out there, and we've got churches, all sorts, where they could be hosted. So I'd love to see that. I'd love to support it, and if there's anything councillors can do. But yeah, that's.
No, well, we can sort that out. We'll take that away as an action to make sure that we bring everyone into it. We have an IAG that's well supported. And again, anyone can be a member of an independent advisory group. It is just an action group of local people with voices. And we're well represented, I'd say, at that group. But we could do, you know, there shouldn't be a limit on the membership for that, because the wider reach means better understanding within the community. And we're giving them an input on that. From a policing perspective, but it's also partners come in as well.
Okay, I've got Andrew, I've got Paul, and then I've got Councillor Rowe. Andrew.
I might be about to steal Paul's thunder, but we have just volunteered. There was a gap between the Essex CSPs working with Essex Police to have theme leads, and there was a gap for hate crime. So Colchester has just volunteered to take that role on. So this is an area where we will be looking at representing all of the Essex councils in how we work together as partners.
That was part of my thunder, and because that's me. And the other part is that both myself and the safeguarding officer have received the hate crime ambassador training from Lou directly, so that we are also qualified to then take on that forward.
Thank you. Councillor Rowe. Okay, all right. I've got Councillor Willits. Anyone else I've missed? Forgive me. Councillor Arnold, go for it.
Yes, following on from Councillor Smalls's question, there is a commonly held belief with retailers that if a sum under £200, I've heard £300 now, is stolen, that the police will not come out and investigate. Is that actually a policy, or is that just a misnomer that's held? And also, as I work within retail, I have noticed a lot of stopped theft, so the staff are actively preventing whole trolley pushes out. They have a lot of data around CCT. Is that something that you work together to ascertain who these people are committing these crimes? Because if they're doing it in one shop, they will probably stop. They will probably then go on to another store and try the same technique.
Okay, first part of that. I'll answer the last bit. So if an offence is stopped, I would say well done to the store staff. It's, you know, we have prevention loss adjusters, don't we? That, you know, security staff that should be stopping crime rather than going, you've reached the threshold and actually we're now going to jump on you and detain you for the police. Actually, if we make as it is coming back to the question about crime prevention, if we design our stores and make our staff aware how they can prevent crime, did a similar thing in Braintree at the sports shops at Freeport by just changing the mindset of our staff about being proactive. They were actually able to reduce the number of trainer thefts by the way that they just got the trainer down, etc., got someone in the stockroom to collect it rather than them disappearing and someone walking off with, you know, £150 worth of trainers. It's just, I would say that's intelligence because a crime's not been committed, but if we can identify them and then link them to another offence, we can then build up a picture that we target them. But as the offence is not complete because it's been stopped, you know, you have to pass the point of payment, etc. But if past the point of payment has not been breached, then, you know, that is not there. What was the first bit of this?
Is there a benchmark amount?
No, there's not. And like I said earlier, we're dealing with single individuals now for more multiple offences but lower values. And if they would just, you know, if we had this benchmark of £200-300, we would just write them off. There was probably historically we were doing it, but now because of the retail action plan and the real focus on is there an individual, can we solve a crime, can we prevent them from committing more crime in the future, etc. And obviously that's working closely with Vinny and his team. All right, so there isn't a benchmark. That's why we're saying if the crime has happened, report it. All right, we will record it. If there's footage and CCTV footage that's clear, if we can get that onto our crime recording system, we then put that against the police national database for facial mapping, and that might produce an individual, even if they don't know the individual, but we need to have those footage. And that's why I'm going for these self-reporting packs are being introduced, so that we can get that footage early. And if we stopping that individual early on their spree of shoplifting, then that impacts later on. Right.
So we've had clarity there. It doesn't matter whether you're trying to steal an £8 bottle of wine or an £800 Gucci handbag. A crime is a crime, and there is no. Well, yeah. On that note, sound good?
Yeah, I just want to fill the gaps really from the business perspective. So we operate two schemes in the city centre, which are very successful, called DISC. So it's a sharing platform where we do exactly that. And the nighttime economy is a lot better because you have door staff and you can ban people from coming in and out. Daytime, not so good. Believe it or not, retailers are reducing their staff that prevent shoplifting because of costs. It's actually more expensive, bizarrely. One thing I would challenge on this, and this is by no means to discredit what my colleague Vinny said earlier on, because the partnership working is very strong with the police at the moment. The challenge we have with retail crime is the importance and the level on the scale of what that crime is equal to. Rightfully, that there are other priorities in when you ring 999 and report that crime. So we do have, on a daily occurrence, retailers, large retailers, catching people having left the premises, but it makes no common sense to detain that person for 2 or 3 hours whilst they wait for the police or anyone, and therefore that person is released. Don't get me wrong, it goes down as a crime, but I think we still have a long way to go between that collation of crime data and trying to solve the problem and actually solving the problem. Because just this week alone, we had a gentleman come in and he was in from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. and he was just doing the circles. He'll get caught, he'll go to the next shop. He'll get caught, he'll go to the next shop. Next one, he'll probably rob about £100 worth. Then he'll go to the next one on CCTV. It's reporting. The issue is it's too late. And this is the problem we've got. Again, you'll never solve it completely, so please don't take this as a oh, we're doomed and we can't solve it. But for me, I also do worry around that point of challenging shoplifters, because, and actually nationally, and you'll see this in the NBCS, which we do work with, actually there's huge recommendations, and a lot of the nationals are actually telling staff to stay away from these people because they are dangerous. So sorry, to go back, that reporting is happening. It's being shared. It is very successful because now instead of, I see one male blue jeans, it's now Joe Blogs. So we can really start to give the police this huge catalogue of where we know these people and their names. So there is a shared catalogue of which the businesses lead on, and we work with the council and police on that.
Okay, Councillor Willis.
Chairman, it's usually my role to be the party pooper. Thanks for the vote of support, colleagues. At the last meeting of this panel, we spent a delightful 4 hours looking at the crime and safer Colchester issues, which are very, very interesting to explore. I mean, lots of enthusiasm around the table. However, the one thing which the Crime and Disorder Committee is supposed to do, unfortunately, got omitted. The only thing that we have to do is scrutinise the strategic assessment and the risk register and look at the benchmarking data, because that's written into the Act of Parliament. All the other stuff, finding out what crimes are being committed in our wards, responding on behalf of the community to a very wide range of issues which can have devastating effect on them, is an optional issue, but it's the more enjoyable and more fruitful, because certainly I feel that we're actually making progress, Chairman, when we review these cases and these issues and we hear solutions coming forward. So I'm with you most of the time, but I just wish to focus attention back onto the three issues that we didn't manage to do at the last meeting. The first of those issues, Chairman, was to scrutinise the strategic assessment and the risk register. Now, the strategic assessment is a long document, and it covers a phenomenal amount of work of the Safer Colchester Partnership. And I think it's quite a splendid document. I mean, there was discussion around the table just, and what was going through my mind is how many of these issues have been omitted from the strategic assessment. And sort of following it on the laptop while we were discussing it, most of them are there. They have been properly captured by our officers. There is a lot of narrative. There is a lot of supporting documents and explanation about what is the strategic assessment, how it has been done, and how it contributes to the overall process. And again, we have to remind ourselves the overall process is what we're scrutinising, which is do a strategic assessment of crime and disorder in the city, produce a risk register explaining what the risks are, how we prioritise the issues surrounding the issues, and then that has to lead in to the key issues that are going to drive the main effort of crime reduction and a safer Colchester for the next year. And unfortunately, we do have to knuckle down, Chairman, and look at those particular issues. We have to convince ourselves as a crime and disorder committee, but it's scrutiny panel, that those documents are fit for purpose, and we have to give them either our endorsement or we have to identify what is omitted from them and ask that the Safer Colchester partner looks again at the strategic assessment, only if it's necessary, to ensure that it comes up to par. Now, I don't know how you wish to deal with this one, Chairman, whether we can deal with the sort of a formal vote on the strategic assessment and then on the risk register and then on the outcomes. I think the one is easy. The strategic assessment is superb, and I don't think we can add, I certainly can't think of anything that I can add to it.
Okay, superb.
So if I could propose, Chairman, that the strategic assessment is fully supported by the Crime and Disorder Committee.
Unanimous. Commend it to Cabinet. Councillor Smalls, do I see you at this point? No, you're giving your thumbs up. Just look like a wave. Okay. Forgive me, Councillor Willetts. You may proceed.
Thank you, Chairman. Having found something which was superb and for which I couldn't find any real criticism. I then turned my attention to the risk register, where I have concerns, Chairman. Firstly, if you look through your report, you'll find that the risk register is actually spread over 4 sheets of paper in a way that is almost impossible to understand it. And the only way I could understand it was actually cut up the agenda, stick it together so that we actually see as one document the whole of the risk register. And I'm not sure how many other of my colleagues have done that exercise. It is an interesting document because it is the intermediate bridge between the strategic assessment and the key recommendations for the forthcoming year. And I was not able to understand much of it. And I wonder whether we could have some enlightenment on what the risk register is, how the various items on the risk register, the assessments have been put together. What are the criteria and the confidence limits, and what is the meaning of the results at the end of the day? That is also true when we look further in the report, and we hear that the risk register, the matrix, was prepared by a multi-agency forum held on the 20th of November, comprising partners from CARA, Colchester City Council, Essex Police Chapter, Next Chapter, Essex County Council. So it would appear that we're being told the risk register was produced, although it's difficult to put together and see, but then the actual determination was not from the risk register, but was from a subcommittee of those organisations. And perhaps had the subcommittee included the bid, which it didn't, had it included a representative of retail, which it didn't, had it included the parish clerks from the rural areas, it would certainly have been different. So it would appear that there is an extra stage following the risk register about which we're being told very little. So the first question I was asked, Chairman, is can we have an explanation of how the risk register works and what thinking went into it and how we decided, what was a 1 for harm to property, what was a 2, what was a 3, and how were issues such as hidden crime dealt with. It's not explained anywhere. So I would just like a little more description about the preparation and presentation. Well, it hasn't been presented. I cannot accept that a spreadsheet presented on 3 separate pages where you have to cut it up with a pair of scissors to find out what it's all about is an acceptable way of conveying the information to us. But can we have a stab at explaining what it's all about? Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, Samantha to lead on this, I think.
Okay, so the template for the risk matrix comes from Essex County Council. So part of it is pre-filled from an Essex level. We did meet as a partnership to come together to look at infilling the remainder of that risk matrix. So that's based on the data from crime figures, etc. So part of it was infilled, the rest of it we needed to consider as a partnership how we perceived the remainder. So there is some guidance on the risk matrix in terms of scoring. So from seeing a printout, you can't see the additional tab, but from the document itself, there's the matrix itself, and then there's a tab for the scores. And the scores give some guidance on how we scored that as a 1, a 2, etc. So it is based on the comparisons and how, at a local level, we see that.
Just for the folks at home, do you want to just give us the tabs? just for the benefit of the folks at home.
Okay.
Because they're not obviously seeing anything other than us in this room. Sorry, I just think it's right to do that.
Okay, so it starts with the volume, so that is the number of reports, and then that scores as compared to Essex. So that is our figures at a local level compared to Essex. The next section is performance, so that is how we compare to the previous year. And then again, the trend compared to Essex is based on the overall figures, so that would be pre-filled. Harm, risk and impact is where we had to look at harm to property, physical harm, psychological harm to people, risk to vulnerable groups and hidden crime. So it was whether we scored it a 0, a 1 or a 2. So that was based on a discussion between the group.
And that's a subjective matter, which I think is an interesting one to raise, because obviously we've seen here statistically a very, very high number of bicycle thefts in Colchester. Now, obviously, you know, if you are someone trying to get to work at all hours, if you're a student, you know, for you, having your bike stolen, and I've been there, at that point in your life, it does affect you. It's really, really inconvenient, and it might mean you don't have a bike for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, it doesn't have the psychological trauma that some of the other very serious sexually and violent offences that we've been hearing about tonight. So I can kind of get that. So I think that's a useful narrative to add. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine. And then there is a column around, there is a column around the CSP approach of benefit. So if it's something that as a partnership we can influence and put some initiatives into place, work with partners to affect those crimes. And then the priorities are around how it's whether it's within the PFCC's priorities, police, a local priority as a community safety partnership, and community. So we total based on how we've scored that's the total column, and then the ranking is based on the comparison between the totals. Obviously, the one with the highest totals will be scored top out of the ranking. It just gives us a picture of the crimes that are coming out, looking at all of those harm, risk, impact, priorities, how totaling those together gives us a picture overall. I don't know if I've made that clear or not.
That's useful. It's very useful for the people at home as well that can't see what necessarily we can see at this point. Paul, thank you.
With regards to the groups asked to form the committee as such to discuss, obviously, one, it's availability and making sure we've got the right balance of people. Now, obviously, business could have been included, and perhaps for the next one, or you know, if we're told to go and do it again, could be obviously invited. But when you look at the priorities that we're suggesting, it would be from a group point of view, when we looked at impact, effect on lives, etc. Whilst shoplifting, whilst theft of a pedal cycle, etc., are for that individual obviously concerning, and as a group, large amounts concerning. If we're not, as a CSP, with the word safety in mind, supporting victims and survivors of serious crimes, physical crimes, sexual violence, if we're not protecting our entire community and encouraging them to look after each other, then obviously we may very well miss opportunities to keep people safe, which is our number one role.
Chairman, that is my greatest worry, that this risk analysis has been carried out, pseudo-mathematical approach. And at the end of it, that very statement that has just been made, that there are overriding concerns within a certain group of people, which have then been imposed on the output of this risk assessment, which then can, I don't know whether it has done, but it can skew the recommendations, the key points for the forthcoming year in a way which are not represented by the true output from the risk matrix. And it sounds as though certain people have been excluded, such as the bid and so on, because their view might have brought about an outcome which you did not want to see. Is that so?
Check, yeah.
So I would say that I didn't have a perspective of where I was going, because this was my first meeting in this role, so I had no preconceived ideas. Obviously, I was working with experts in their field. PFCC had directed their priorities, Essex had issued their priorities, we have our local priorities. Also, if you look at the work that was done around last year with the operations and the events that we put in place to support the community and the impact they were having, all of those things go into a picture. But when you're looking at impact, frequency, etc., there's not going to be an exact science to this. It's going to, and some of it will be subjective, and it's not one person's opinion. It was a group of people in the room. So my personal view didn't come into it. I went with the scoring.
It wasn't a personal view, Chairman. It was just the process that we had explained to us, that the risk assessment was done, and then the decision on what would be the key points was decided by a group of people who had in mind that certain issues, regardless of what was in the matrix, were more important than others, which is what you just explained to us.
Just to clarify, no, the people that were there, we have some guidance in terms of whether it's a 0, a 1 or a 2. We talk about it as a group, and we did have a good spread across knowledge, and we're all members of the Community Safety Delivery Board, where we regularly meet quarterly to look at the work that's going on, the annual partnership plan, what is happening within the partnership. So we all had a good steer on what is happening locally, as well as the police input from a crime perspective and what's happening from the boots on the ground. So as Paul said, it didn't come down to one person's opinion. We had adult social care there, we had children and families, we had, we invited all of our statutory partners to participate. It's having enough people to be able to have a quality discussion and not make it, I don't know.
Okay, Chair, if I can, I'm conscious of time. I'm conscious of time as well. So hang on. I'm conscious of time. We do need to give people a comfort break. It's only fair. So Andrew, you were first. I think we then need to break and return in about 12 minutes. Andrew.
Just on the democratic process around this, all CSP members were invited to take part, and all CSP members were circulated with the draft version of this for comment afterwards. So everyone that is a member of the CSP had a chance to have their say on it and to refine it. I thought it was worth making that point.
Councillor Rowe, we're not going to take the answer, but I'll take your point.
No, it's fine. I just want to make a point that I think that we need to sort of, in defence of the people that are on the committee and the way that this is put together, I think we need to take into consideration how this seems to be put together with regards to the subjective nature of how we're dealing with the prevention of crime and the risks of crime, which leads into the risk register. And I think that ultimately, I do think this calls into question the overall strategy from a higher level of how we actually look at the crime and how way it feeds into the risk register and then feeds into Colchester. I don't necessarily think it's anything particularly wrong with the process we have here. I think from what I've read and what I've seen, it seems to be that we just follow the process exists. The way it happens is subjective, and I think the subjective nature of it is ultimately the problem that we face.
Okay, let's park it there, colleagues, because we do need to give people a comfort break. It is 7:44. Can I suggest we're all back here at 7:56, please? So that's 12 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Order, part two. Welcome back from our comfort break. Thank you, everyone. We are making good progress this evening. It's a valuable evening out, and we are in the middle of discussing the methodology behind the risk. Councillor Willits, you were mid-flow, but I had to interrupt you. I do apologise, so that we could have a comfort break. So we left off with you having some slight concerns around the membership that was involved in making some of these decisions, because you felt that perhaps there were others who might have had an input that would have been of use. Not to say that they might not have come to the same conclusions. We don't know, do we? But you had the floor. I will hand it back to you.
Thank you, Chairman. As ever, as we move on in the evening, we learn more. The last suggestion was that the scoring and presumably the QAing of the risk register was done by the entire partnership. But the text in the report which we had, which has led me to ask those questions, said that there were a restricted number of organisations that actually carried out the work of condensing the output of the risk matrix. And clearly, had it included representatives from the bank, we might have had electronic transfer fraud and other frauds there, and the bid and retail seemed seemingly absent. But I'll take it then, Chairman, that the subsequent statement amending the report that all members of the partnership were involved sounds much more sensible and is something which we should accept. But I would ask the question, who actually did the scoring and who actually checked, QA'd the report? And from a point of view of a scrutiny panel, we're supposed to ask questions to ensure that the processes are robust and have been done properly. I mean, is there somewhere a document which records the response of the members of the Safer Colchester Partnership to the draft of the matrix?
So the criteria, the scoring document is provided to us from Essex County Council along with the draft template. So that was our starting point. As Andrew Tyrrell said, the draft was then shared through the partnership as well. But from a perspective of the decision making, the question was who made the decision. So from the partners present, we came up with our proposal, and it then went through management from the CSP. So Andrew is chair of the partnership. So he would have seen the draft as well.
Is there formal documentation on the QA of the risk matrix? In other words, did you send it out to the partnership? The partnership people responded, including Andrew and the bid, not shown as being a respondent, but you say he was. I mean, is there document existing which shows that a QA process was carried out on this matrix by the generality of the partnership, as opposed to the 5 members that are identified in the report? Presumably that document either exists or it doesn't exist.
A document doesn't exist. There'll be an email chain that we can produce, and when for example, the strategic assessment of crime document was produced, that's all available through the Community Safety Delivery Board. So that again could be evidenced through those documents.
I have one final question on the risk matrix. It's my understanding, which may well be flawed, and I hope I'm educated, that the idea of this exercise, that is the strategic assessment, the risk matrix, leading to the key recommendations for the following year, is actually to set the priorities and to shape the priorities such that they best meet the needs of bringing about a safer environment, a more crime-free environment in Colchester. Yet one of the inputs to the matrix is the police priority. I would have thought that would have been an output from this matrix, telling the police what the people of Colchester believe are the most serious issues as raised to them via the Safer Colchester Partnership. So why are the views of the Police and Crime Commissioner and the police priority, etc., included as an input which has been scored as opposed to an output from this exercise?
Unfortunately, it's the process. We don't control the process. The process is laid down as I understand it. And the police will obviously have their priorities both set, and I'm not going to speak for Mr. Cox, but probably nationally and by Essex. They will have their priorities set from well above our levels. And therefore, that will be part of the process they bring to the meeting. As I said, I can see the point whereby, you know, everyone else should be involved and then say to the local police, this is what we wish you to target. However, that is not the process. Obviously, the police have their input into this.
Yeah, as Paul said, this form comes out for us to fill in. I've no idea who decided to put the police priority there as well. I obviously give an input and score a professional judgment on what my policing priorities are that the Chief Constable sets and that I have to target, and then that's added with the other scores. But
thank you. I'm going to jump in quickly and I'll come to you, Sam Good, and I see others. Interesting point around the police input. Commander Cox, do you get the ability to influence that input from a Colchester perspective, or is there any conflict? Because obviously, you know, Little Hawksley is very different from Loudon. You know, Essex is a broad place. So can you give us some sort of a comfort that Colchester is at the heart of this and it's not just a corporate Essex police overall, or should it be? I don't know.
so for me, I'm asked to look at certain crime types which are relevant in Colchester: drug-driven and alcohol-driven violence, serious violence, domestic abuse in Colchester, as we've seen and heard about the figures in Colchester. So yes, from that perspective, I will score, but they are also relevant to the force plan and the force priorities. So they are what harming the force. That is what's harming within Colchester.
Okay. Sam Good and then Councillor Rowe.
Yeah. So, how do I say this? So I think my biggest challenge with this, and admittedly, whether we did or didn't respond to is another matter. I think my challenge, whether we did respond to this or not, it feels like we're doomed from the moment that government or the higher powers make a retail crime a priority or not, because it's almost predetermined that we're not a priority. Of course, let me just add a caveat. There are a lot on this list that have a bigger impact on people's lives than shoplifting. I please don't think I'm disregarding that. But what I don't understand is how retail crime and business crime full stop still can't be a priority. Because you could fall down rabbit holes on every single one on the list on how they affect people's lives emotionally, physically. You could fall down rabbit holes. And I think that's my big challenge here is we all know, rightly or wrongly, whether you agree with me or not, retail crime and business crime is not a priority and is not given the attention that it deserves. You know, I can, not to name any of the businesses in particular, but we've lost a countless amount of businesses this year to bankruptcy, lost their house, lost their home, lost their family because of these issues and knock-on effects. So sorry, to go back to my original point, I do feel like we are doomed from the get-go on feeling slightly predetermined that we're not going to, retail crime and business crime isn't going to get enough of attention, if that makes sense. And I think that's probably the point that Councillor Willits feels. And I think that also leads on to the latter point of what this document is going to be used for in the future when we are fighting our cause from a business perspective is if we're not on the priority list, then is it that we are behind a long list of other priorities and therefore wouldn't get as much attention? It's a genuine question. It's not that'd be good to know that answer.
Sorry, just to confirm, the process, the advice is you have 3 priorities. And obviously we felt strongly enough that instead of the 5, we wanted the 4th, and the 4th obviously is about communities and empowerment and dealing with things. Because you're perhaps, although business crime and shoplifting doesn't come within those current priorities, doesn't mean it's ignored. If you look at the police response currently and the actions that are taking place, the extra arrests, the Essex Police Dispatch email that comes out that you can sign up to shows the extra arrests in Colchester and across Essex for shoplifting. This doesn't mean that you're not being supported by the police and the partnership where we can, but ultimately as a partnership we can't do everything. And we shouldn't do everything because then we will dilute everything. However, Sam will give you some details from the report.
Sam, and then Councillor Rowe,
Sorry.
if it's on this quickly.
Yeah, just to kind of say, in terms of the key priorities, the wording there is the wording that we've drafted, but behind those key priorities is an annual partnership plan. So the annual partnership plan that we've drafted for the coming years has objectives under each of those priorities, where we then break down as a partnership the things that we can work on. So, for example, under priority 4, there's something around influencing change in behaviour to reduce people becoming victims of crime. There's use of intelligence and data, and there's early engagement and intervention opportunities. So we'll look at the projects that we can put in as a partnership to reach those objectives, to ultimately achieve the key priorities. So there will be elements to tackle some of the things that aren't particularly worded specifically. And that annual partnership plan is something that's reviewed through the Community Safety Delivery Board on a quarterly basis. And it's something that all partners within the CSP have access to and feed into in terms of the interventions and projects that are taking place.
Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Chair. I think some of this has been sort of answered in the responses that we've got, so I appreciate those points. I'd just like to clarify on the priorities. Under the police priority, there does seem to be a lot of zeros, which, thank you for the clarification. I think it doesn't mean it's completely ignored. It just means it's of lower priority. So maybe we probably need to make that a little bit clearer, maybe. But it does concern me under violence against the person. We only have a 1 against violence with injury, and all the rest are considered 0. Now, sort of having spoken to people and residents and sort of concerns of people that come into the town centre and just in and around Essex and sort of what we read in the news, etc. Violence against individuals is something that seems like it should be a bigger priority. So I don't want to put any subjective nature around this, but it does seem like, to Dennis's point, to Councillor Willett's point, some of the priorities that we have on here, I'm not entirely sure why we have the police priority on here when we should feed into the police priority rather than the police priority being sort of added in. So a bit of a mix of points there where I'm not entirely sure why we're zeros on some of these points. And I think is there any 2s on here? Everything seems to be a 1. Police priority, which seems odd to me. There doesn't seem to be a top priority that you're aiming at. Is there any 2s on there that I can see? And I think they're all just 1s and 0s. So that seems odd to me.
Undercourt.
Yeah, so the police priorities were already pre-filled by the analysts before we even got this document. And also you mentioned that this should feed the police priorities. Well, no, this feeds the CSP priorities. It doesn't feed the police priorities.
Point taken, thank you.
Councillor Smalls.
Yeah, I think I just want to add a comment, building from what Councillor Willits has said. I mean, hopefully it's not just me, but this whole risk matrix, I think it's quite difficult for people who aren't used to looking at this sort of information, well, myself. And like as Councillor Willits pointed out, the way it's presented, you've got particularly when you're looking at it on a computer, it's almost impossible. And but I appreciate that's not down to you, is it? This is a predetermined form, so it might be a good idea if councillors had some kind of training on this, how to interpret it a bit better at some point, maybe not a priority, but in preparation for the next time we have this, because when I was looking at it, I could understand the first page, but beyond that, it's a challenge. And sort of with the shoplifting, and I know I've banged on about this, but I do understand what Sam's saying, and I think the shoplifting, it can also cover a lot of things. It's not just a victimless crime. This is people's livelihoods, and also we talk about the safety of women and girls. A lot of people working in the shops, they can be quite young, obviously, they're female. I don't want to be sexist, but that still is quite a large demographic. And if they're frightened, that's not good. So it's not just the act of a bottle of vodka's been nicked. It can encompass the other things as well, I think.
Okay, I will come to Councillor Rowe. Yeah, go.
Just a quick point, Chair. Sorry, Councillor. Commander Cox. A point that you raised, that you said it comes, the police priority comes predetermined. Did you mention earlier who predetermines that? Who fills in the? Do we know?
We get it from the Essex Police Analyst provides it to Sam.
Who are the Essex Police Analysts? Where does it? Do you know where it comes from? Is it like a decision? Sorry. I know I get stuck with these sometimes as well. Yeah.
The template itself comes pre-filled in certain areas. From an Essex level, they pre-fill it based on their consultations through Safer Essex, and that forum in conjunction with the police analysts. So it comes to us in that way.
Sorry, Chair, just very quickly on the point of training, we did discuss during the break that potentially as we had a chair's briefing on Thursday, potentially prior to this happening again, we can have a briefing, committee or councillors briefing where hopefully we can explain this in a bit more depth. I could benefit from it. And then we could actually perhaps all understand it together.
I would be really grateful. It looks like, it reminds me of when I learnt binary at school or something.
Yeah, and it's worth noting there is a churn in councillors. I mean, some of you guys are in situ for a long time. We have this crazy annual election system in Colchester, unlike every authority that surrounds Colchester, and it means that I'm afraid we have to double down and work even harder internally to make sure that all of our new councillors are given the training opportunities to understand how the mechanics of this stuff works and how your wonderful organisations work as well. It's just worth making that political point. Why not? I just did it. Okay, Councillor Willits, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. Many of the concerns that I had at the beginning of this debate have now been answered, and I feel much happier. But I still have a sort of nagging doubt. This is the risk matrix is the key component which sits between the strategic analysis and the recommendations for priorities for next year. So it is a really important document. And from the discussions we've had this evening, I think there are certain unknowns. I don't want to go into them, but there are certain unknowns about how it operates. And it should be a risk matrix for Colchester. I mean, the whole function is to take the strategic analysis of Colchester and funnel it by means of lots of inputs from various interested partners into the decision on the key messages, the key issues for next year. And what has come out to me this evening is that a lot of this is being determined by people who have nothing to do with Colchester and are looking at sort of wider or have different axes to grind. And I think when we get to this position next year, it would be good to have the matrix presented in a way that we can actually see it and understand it, and perhaps an explanation of how the Colchester issues have rippled through and the decisions have been made in an obvious way from the scorings to come up with the following year's analysis. I think it serves a jolly useful purpose. It's done the task for this year, so I think, Chairman, we should accept it. But we should accept it with a caveat that there was a degree of uncertainty and inability to understand certain aspects of how it worked. And given its key nature in the process of producing the key recommendations for next year, it is so important we need to give just a little more emphasis to it next year. But let's accept it this year and enable the process to continue.
So we're accepting our own faults there as councillors in our lack of regularly looking at this type of information. So we would like narrative, if it could accompany in the following year, a bit more narrative. And I think we still had a relevant point from Councillor Willits earlier about the composition of who's involved in this, because we know, don't we, for example, that there's some really, really knowledge out there in the communities, and they're probably, in fact, there's one happening right now, and that's Little Hawksley Parish Council, and I'm not there, and they only meet every 2 months, but I'm here, I'm very happy to be here. But the parish councils out there in the rural communities do phenomenal work. They are our eyes and ears, and quite often, some of those guys have got time on their hands to contribute and give information through to put into that cauldron to make it all work. So I think we've got contentment, unless anyone disagrees and wants to do something different. I'm content with what's been suggested so far. Yep. Okay, thank you. Shall we move on? We accept and we're content. However, with if possible, in the future, further narrative. And I think we're kind of planting a seed there around the composition of who's involved in that matrix. We're planting the seed. We're not being too prescriptive, but we're giving a sort of an olive branch in the direction of someone like Sam Good, who might want to be noted within the report. So we know that you saw it, but maybe just being noted in the report as well. Okay, moving on, Councillor Willits.
We're moving on to the second point now, are we,
yes,
Chairman? That is the benchmarking.
Yes.
The benchmarking is also one of the top issues which we should be scrutinising, and to my mind, it is not yet reaching the level where I feel particularly confident. The report contained some useful information comparing us with Colchester, Basildon, Chelmsford, Southend and Thurrock, and I had to feed that into my spreadsheet analyzer and turn the handle several times to get out various alternatives which actually spread a fair amount of light, and not that I should be handing out documents at the meeting, a fair amount of light on what happens. By rearranging the spreadsheet to show sort of Colchester's crimes, violence without industry, domestic abuse, stalking, harassment, violence with injury, ASB, public order, are listing down the issues the major issues in Colchester, and it shows a very similar pattern in the other members of the family that we looked at. You can also do a ranking on the information that was provided for us by establishing the average number of incidents in the family, then looking at Colchester's performance, such as was mentioned by the chairman earlier on. Theft of bicycles was very high in Colchester, whereas theft from motor vehicles was very low. And this is discernible in terms of a diagram very easily from the information which was published in the report. But unfortunately, we had to dig very deep into this report to actually find and make sense of the information that was provided. So again, I think we accept that the information on benchmarking was there, but it's really the views and the meaning of the information which is lacking from the report. And if in future years we could have a little more on the benchmarking, we can argue whether Colchester, Basildon, Chelmsford and Southend and Thurrock are the right family to compare it with, and whether Blackpool might have more in common as a tourist place than Chelmsford to compare Colchester. But it does appear that the information is around and we just need to process it so that the members of the committee can better understand where we are in relation to the family members of our benchmarking group.
Obviously, if the data provided, if there are specific requests for how people would like it laid out, we can obviously look to do so. There are graphs and things that are available, and if that would be easier to put in rather than just narrative and figures, then we'll obviously revisit it.
Would it be useful if Councillor Willits provided you with the specific spreadsheet that he's talking about, where he's, what would you like to call this spreadsheet, Councillor Willits?
I don't know, as a statistician, Chairman. I mean, the data exists. We're not really interested in the data, we're interested in what we can learn from the data. And the report gives us the data. The report doesn't give us helpful views of that data, which enable us to see where Colchester is quite superior in the performance of keeping safe and keeping crime down compared with the other members of the family, and where it's perhaps woefully deficient. Not that there are any such items in the listing, but it was really difficult going to try and understand what the benchmarking data was saying to us. And I think we need help from our officers, Chairman, to ensure that this is explained diagrammatically, because that's what I understand, in perhaps a more extensive way, so that we can appreciate what Colchester's position is, where we're achieving wonderful things and where perhaps a little more emphasis needs to be given to make sure we stay level with the other members of the family.
Or ahead. Okay. Well, I don't think there's any harm, Councillor Willits, in you sharing the way this is to everyone here, because it does make it very, very easy to digest, and the more information, the better. Okay, good. Right.
So if we can have a recommendation or a note that the next year's benchmarking should be a little more adventurous than this year's.
Adventurous. But to help that, I'm sure Councillor Willits will provide us with this if we need to. Okay, good. Right. Shall we proceed? Okay. Councillor Willits, you can kick off.
Sorry, Chairman, I seem to be hogging the floor.
It's fine. Everyone, no, I held you back. Everyone else had a fair hearing.
Point three of the things we were looking at this evening, to receive an explanation of the divergence of domestic abuse statistics compiled by the different partner organisations. I found the explanations given to us both in the text and orally was extremely helpful indeed. The one issue that I have difficulty with, and it came through at the last meeting, I was still perplexed then, when does a domestic problem become a crime? Because with many crimes there is there is either the crime has been committed or it's not been committed. When you go into the shop and you pick up something, don't pay, as you walk out through the door, you commit a crime if it's your intention not to return it. But with domestic violence, it would seem we have a smooth graduation from hardly any violence at all to the point where it's criminal and it needs immediate attention. But throughout that graduation, there are points where it's unclear whether the level of domestic violence has reached the point at which it is a crime and where it should be reported and where the police should be involved, as opposed to perhaps guidance being given informally by one of the organisations on how perhaps the problems can be within the family, can be mediated and harmonious relationships continue. And I don't understand how we decide when a relationship has broken down and become abusive to the point that it's become a crime, and how folks know, the people involved, how do they know when the level of abuse has reached the point that it's a crime, and they should be reporting it not just to the support organisations, but they should ensure that it is reported to the police. There were 3 levels of domestic violence given to us: standard, medium, and pretty awful. And it would just be useful to hear an explanation of how one deals with this smooth graduation and how you ensure that people go to the police at the right point and they don't go when perhaps circumstances would just result in their marriage or partnership breaking down unnecessarily because the police have been involved and it could have been saved by a support organisation. So I don't know whether that sort of explains the dilemma I have in understanding this one, Chairman.
A very difficult question. Bev, you're looking at me like you might have some answers.
Well, I mean, you've put an awful lot on the table there. I think the first thing to say is that domestic abuse is a crime, regardless of how severe you think it is or how small you think it is. And domestic abuse is domestic abuse. It's not a relationship breakdown. It's not marital difficulties. It's not something that can be ameliorated by a bit of counselling or a bit of marriage guidance counselling. It's the use of coercive control. It's the use of power and control in order to subjugate somebody within the relationship, either through fear of violence or through violence itself, in order to control what they do, either by their finances, by their freedom, by their behaviour, by their fear. So it's got nothing to do with a marital breakdown. It's not a conflict. There's no balance in this relationship. So in any time that this happens, it's a crime. So there's no gradation of whether something is a crime or not when it's domestic abuse. Now, having said all of that, how you prove that it's a crime when something meets the level of evidential purposes in order for the police to do something about it is really incredibly difficult. How do you prove coercive control? How does a victim prove that the power that is wielded by the person who they are with is so great that actually they're terrified to leave the house? They're terrified to not answer their phone. They're terrified to wear something different. How do you prove that to somebody? Because actually it's really subtle and it's insidious, and it eats away at somebody's self-confidence and ability to make those decisions and to stand up for themselves. So it's incredibly difficult to prove domestic violence, coercive control as a crime. But the mere fact that it's happened by virtue of the difference in power and control means that it's domestic violence, which means it is a crime. So I just want to be really clear that there's no gradations. There's a gradation in terms of risk of harm, serious harm to the person. So you have a standard risk where somebody's experiencing coercive control, where their life is being impacted by somebody else's control over them, financially, emotionally, physically. And then you go through and you get to high risk, where actually somebody is at immediate or significant risk of harm. And absolutely, those are the cases that we work together really closely in partnership because they're the ones that grab the headlines. They're the ones that actually, you know, somebody needs to flee their home in order to escape that. And then you have the medium risk, where actually that's probably the hardest situation to live in, because they're in a melting pot of fear. And actually the majority of domestic homicides will arise out of that high medium, because actually they're not high risk. They don't have that big multi-agency service around them, making sure that everybody working together to make sure that they're safe. But actually a high medium is potentially in a far riskier situation than perhaps high risk. And in terms of how do people know, I mean, that's the eternal question. We work incredibly hard on a daily basis, as do our partners in the police and across a range of other agencies, to try and explain to people what domestic abuse is. And lots of people won't identify with that term. You'll talk to them about domestic abuse and they'll be, oh, that's not me, I'm not a victim, that's not domestic abuse. But actually, if you talk about what they're experiencing, what it feels like, what the impact is on their daily life, they'll identify with that, but they won't identify with the term. So you've you know, voiced what is an incredibly difficult situation for all of us, in that how do you get people to understand? Because it's an emotional thing. People will be in denial. They don't want to think that they're a victim. They don't want to think that the person that they love is choosing to behave like this and choosing to make their life so miserable. So they'll be trauma bonded to them, and they'll be in denial, and they won't want to think that that's what's happened to them. They'll have been isolated, so they won't have people around them to perhaps shine a light and to ask questions about, you know, are you really happy? Do you feel safe? So we rely on lots of other agencies, GPs, health sector, to ask those really pertinent questions when they see somebody in front of them who might be having some of those behaviours that make you think that maybe their relationship isn't as safe as everyone here has, that home isn't a safe place for them. So I've had a bit of a stab at what is, you know, a really complex question that you've asked, but I think the biggest thing to take away is that there isn't grades of whether something is a crime. If it's domestic abuse, it's a crime. Whether it reaches the evidential level or not, it is something entirely different.
But to us, it is an issue because we're the keeper of the statistics. So we have to know whether something is a crime or not. And I'm still not unconvinced of your argument that domestic violence is digital. You know, either it's on or it's off. Just as shoplifting is either the bottle has been stolen or it's not. You know, I still have this nagging doubt that you can start from zero and slowly move towards some of the horrendous circumstances you're describing, and there must come a point where you believe that coercion is there, but you know, how much coercion? The chairman coerces me all the time. You know, I have to be nice to him, otherwise he doesn't let me speak first. And in life, we're always trying to coerce people, persuade people to do other things, and you know, that's not wrong. I mean, no one's arrested the chairman for coercing me. But eventually, it must get to a point where the circumstances that you're describing start to take over. But is there not a sort of grey area between nothing and sort of the very, very mild coercion, where no one would really say it was coercion, but you know, there's a hint of it, and it slowly gets worse until a point where you can, the agencies can definitely say, you know, this is now gone beyond the point of friendly banter, and it's now into coercion, and it needs dealing with. And it's like that area at the bottom of the scale that I don't quite follow. You know, how you decide whether it started or whether it's not yet reached the level at which it would be useful of your time and police time to intervene.
So you are right, it isn't as cut and dried as somebody stealing a bottle of vodka from a shop and walking out of the door and that being an absolute thing. Clearly, with all relationships, there comes a point, if it were immediate, we wouldn't have any domestic abuse, because if somebody on the first date punched you in the face, you wouldn't go back for a second date, would you? But actually, you know, you have a relationship. There's a phenomenon called love bombing in the first part, where actually the perpetrator works really hard to be absolutely everything that the other person wants them to be. I think the point at which domestic abuse becomes domestic abuse is where it's the twist in the power and control. So you talk about Councillor Law's coercive behaviour with you. The reality is that you can give as good as you get. You can walk away from his coercion. You don't have to do what he says. That's not the case in a relationship that has domestic abuse. So the point at which that power and control means that another person loses their choice in what they do and starts to be motivated by fear is the point at which I guess you could classify that as domestic abuse. It's likely to be relatively early in the relationship, but not relatively early at the point at which anybody else will see it. It's not called a hidden harm for nothing. So it's very early, but I would say that the point at which it starts to become pure domestic abuse is when that person loses their ability to make to make choices and another person is wielding power over them.
So can I ask then, Chairman, in terms of reporting these into the crime and disorder statistics, are you positive that the systems work sufficiently well to ensure that the totality of the problem is captured as crime?
I mean, certainly everybody who comes through to us for support, we have a really robust initial assessment. So we make sure that we absolutely understand the situation, and we only take and support people who we are satisfied are experiencing domestic abuse. The point at which we're satisfied that they're experiencing domestic abuse and need our help, it's a crime because they're experiencing domestic abuse. They are being controlled through fear or fear of violence by somebody else. Whether we capture the totality of the problem, no. You know, it's a well-known researched and evidence fact that we probably only get about 40% of people who are willing to speak out and talk about their own experience. So lots of research says that about 60% of domestic abuse is still hidden. So we don't have the totality of it. I'm absolutely confident that every single number that I put in our report is domestic abuse and is therefore a crime.
I will come to Councillor Smalls, but I just wanted to interject on this point just because I'm conscious that Bev, you're sat next to Rita, and Rita has a very specific area around young people who are also impacted by DV and coercive relationships, etc. And we've seen some tragic cases recently, haven't we? And we're seeing national headlines around wider SEN challenges, mental health, we know. So can we take some comfort tonight that you guys are, you know, working glove in hand on this matter? I'm sure we all want more resources to do stuff, but are we at this early stage, as Councillor Willetts is highlighting, are we hand in glove?
So I would absolutely agree with everything that Bev has said in relation to the power of attorney. And actually, there is a lot of work being done in many different arenas around healthy relationships, because it's you know, before we get to the stage that we're talking about, it's healthy relationships, and it's healthy relationships also with friendships as well, because that's where sort of vulnerability to exploitation also happens. So there's risk avert that is happening in all schools. There's a lot of work being done in schools and education establishments to really work on healthy relationships. And an example of that recently has been there's been funding that has just been given for teenage teenage pregnancy strategy, and that focuses on healthy relationships and working with teenagers with healthy relationships. But that a whole array across the partnership is really working on the healthy relationships and helping to identify what is healthy and what's not a healthy relationship, because that's basically what we're talking about. Because if you don't recognize that you're in an unhealthy relationship, you won't recognize that there's an issue with power and control, be it in a sexual relationship, romantic relationship, friendship relationship. It is about it being a healthy relationship, and there is a lot of work and a lot of focus on it for all the reasons that we've sort of discussed today.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Smalls.
Thank you, and it's all been really, really informative. I was wondering earlier today, and I've wondered this in the past, if there's any debate around the language around domestic abuse, because I think unfortunately the whole term domestic abuse has got a history that possibly people maybe either don't take it as seriously or they think it's not going to be taken as seriously. And there's a different impact between saying domestic abuse and abuse, domestic violence and violence, domestic homicide and homicide. So I wonder if there's any current debate about that, because if somebody's violent, whether it's in the home or if it's in the pub, it's violence, isn't it? But having said that, I clearly realise that it is a different category, it is a different thing, but the violence is violence. And I think maybe sometimes the word domestic, because people associate that with something other, don't they? And something nice and cosy. And I wonder if there are any current debates in your field around the language.
I think you are right. There is a sense of minimisation when you put the word domestic in front of any of the things that we have talked about. I think it's incredibly difficult to take the word domestic away, though, because the addition of that is really the way that you describe that systematic approach to. So violence in a pub, I would imagine is most likely a one-off incident rather than the use of that power and control over somebody. I think that we've done an awful lot of work in partnership to make sure that domestic abuse, and we use abuse rather than violence, because we're trying to get away from people thinking that it's about violence, because actually it's the fear of and that control element that actually is far more prevalent than the actual violence. So we work really hard to make sure that that addition of the word domestic doesn't minimise when our uniform police are going out and responding to incidents, when considering how important something is to deal with. And certainly Essex Police have put an awful lot of resources into supporting domestic abuse investigation team, the domestic abuse problem solving team. It's a really high priority, and they involve us on an almost daily basis, and they involve us in lots of quality things like looking at body worn camera footage from officers attending incidents, and they bring our practitioners in to add their viewpoint into that review of what happened, to bring our trauma-informed lens to see how that officer responded and was there anything better that could be done. So I think we are working really, really hard to make sure that that word domestic doesn't undermine the importance that is put on it. I think you're right that people don't identify with domestic abuse, and it's got a term that has all sorts of connotations with it. So a lot of the work that we're doing at the moment is to look at how we can speak to people without the words domestic abuse, how we can talk to people about what's going on in their relationship. Are they happy? Is this how you're feeling? Is this how someone else is making you feel? And we're working on a campaign at the moment called Everyone Knows Someone, because actually if we were to all explore the people that are around us in our own families, our friends, we probably, if we look carefully, all have somebody that either we absolutely know or somebody who is in a relationship that makes us uneasy from looking from the outside in. And I think it's really important to skill those people to recognise that in somebody else, to skill them so that they can have that first conversation with the person they care about, and that they know how to refer them on so that they can get the support that they need. but all without using the term domestic abuse, all about describing how a person might be feeling and the impact that it has on their life. And I think one of the biggest questions that we ask people when they are perhaps in denial or wanting to not think that it's domestic abuse is, simply when you thought about a relationship that you wanted to be in, is this how you saw it being? Are you happy? Is home safe? Is this how you wanted your life to be? And actually that's often the way that you can get people to really think about whether they have got all of those things, what they hoped for. And if they say no, then you can start to explore with them why that is and gently introduce the concept that actually it probably falls within this category and we absolutely can help. Sorry, that was a really long-winded way of answering.
Oh no, thank you. That was really useful. And I wasn't criticising the use of the term because I can see you do need to separate it, but at the same time it's got a sort of unfortunate history. So but having said that, the way we perceive language does change, and I think you're doing a really good job of educating us all tonight, so that's brilliant.
Thank you. I've made a note of that because I remember as a teenager the moving away from STD to STI because the disease has such a negative connotation, and in actual fact, the infection was more acceptable. So I've made a note here: domestic abuse, not domestic violence. I'll try not to use DV. Okay, all right. We've had a very good session this evening. It's been really, really useful. Do other panel members have any burning questions while we're here? If not, I propose we probably look towards Andrew, just to remind us all, if you wouldn't mind, verbatim, maybe, what the strategic priorities are for the partnership, and just so that the guys at home that are still watching at 5 to 9 know, with certain clarity, what those areas are. What do we care about? What does the partnership do? Andrew, you don't have to do it, but I thought it might be a nice idea to remind everyone.
If you want the verbatim, you might have to look in Sam's direction, I'm afraid, at this time of night.
Go on then.
But we were going to suggest a slight change to priority 1, actually, if
Well, that's why I gave you the floor for that moment.
Sam, do you want to give the verbatim as they are at the moment, then I'll pick up the change.
Support victims and survivors of domestic abuse and sexual offences. Enable the community to reduce violence against women and girls and promote safe and healthy relationships. Protect the vulnerable and those at risk of serious violence or exploitation. And empower people to build safe, inclusive and resilient communities.
Very good. And the suggested amendment?
So because priority 1 also includes ceasing reoffending from known perpetrators and trying to prevent people becoming perpetrators in the first place, we thought actually the focus of that wording does look at support. So we were suggesting that we added prevention of, and then the support to the end of the sentence. So prevention of domestic abuse and sexual offences, comma, with support too, and then the rest
I
of
think
the
that's an
sentence.
excellent idea. Super from Councillor Willits. Okay, great. Then we have it. Thank you so much for all your time. It is really, really appreciated. We all know how busy you are, particularly on the front line. Thank you, members. It's been a busy year of scrutiny. This is the last one. So depending on what happens over the coming weeks, we may or may not be back in this room altogether. I hope we are, actually, because I think that actually we need a bit of continuity, going back to my point about having annual elections and churn of councillors. We need to have some continuity in this authority. We'll get better outcomes, in my opinion. But thank you very much, everyone. I wish you a safe and pleasant journey home, and that concludes the meeting this evening.
Thank you very much, everyone.